Really great to meet everyone who I haven't met before. An implementer's journey through Divergent Authorization. I'm Brendan. I'm head of product at Flexpa. We talk about who I am, who Flexpa is, and why that positions us to see a lot of smart on fire, a lot of fire, and a lot of weird shit. So, who am I, and how did I get into the weird world of fire? Weird world of fire. Let's take a step back. When I present, I have three goals. One is the G.I. Joe principle, one to illuminate, enlighten, and teach. The second is the Maximus principle. I want to interest and entertain, hence memes are ever going to sprinkle without and some jokes. And then the Dewey principle. I strive to not be inaccurate, erroneous, or offensive. So if I am, especially if Josh Mandel's hanging out here, he can call my shit, as well as many of you. But who am I? I started my career at Epic in 2012, worked over in the Netherlands with some of the Ziekenhuizen we talked about. And that's a picture of me in tulips. Just kidding. That's a random picture of the Netherlands. I went to Redox, an interoperability company, started to get into FHIR. I'd heard of FHIR at Epic, but I'd done some other things, some other integration types, more ancient in their nature. And then still did that at Redox with HL7 version 2, but got more into FHIR as it started to take off. I lived in San Francisco at the time. I then went to Zeus, another interoperability company, more focused on virtual care providers. I moved up to Portland, Oregon. Zeus is based out of Boston. Zeus uses a FHIR data store. So I started to really get into the nuts and bolts. But then Flexpa. Flexpa is a patient access company, again, to Plaid. And we're connected to CMS patient access APIs, which are all FHIR. So I also write an API newsletter, including FHIR, that you can check out at helpapiguide.substack.com. And it's very infrequent, but hopefully rich content. Started as HL7 analyst, like Mario, loving pipes, went to CDA evangelist in the Netherlands, helping them stand up some BHZ Nictus stuff, some document exchange, and then I've pivoted to APIs. Anyway, I may be ahead of product, but I do commit. So it was my street cred. Anyway, who's Flexpa? I'm going to go through sort of like a changed version of a piece of our sales deck by Angela, one of our team, the head of design. So if it looks better than the rest of the deck, it's because of her. So like I said, Flexpa helps applications embed claims data via FHIR APIs that were mandated from the CMS in the US. So we go to every insurer in the US, connect to their APIs that are legally mandated to be there, and then deal with all the differences. Somebody said, is FHIR plug and play? Is Smart on FHIR plug and play? No, it's not. It's distinctly not. It's about as plug and play as HL7. The great advantage is the API ecosystem that comes with it and the internet native technologies and the open documentation. But plug and play is fighting against the human nature of entropy. There's this implementing something because of so many people's different brains means there's implementation and entropy. And the beauty of an aggregator like Flexpa or many other companies is to simplify that access. So we act as a historical claims gateway and we fight against entropy. Anyway, that's us. You don't care about us that much. We're much like Plaid. Patient jumps in, they choose their health plan. There's a consent screen that we present. We jump out to the payer and they authorize us. So we jump to the authorization URL. They fill in their username and credential. It passes back an authorization code, which we exchange at a token endpoint for a access token, and not potentially an ID token, and a refresh token. And then we continue to power novel applications with claims data. So there's all the resources we typically see across these endpoints. Claims is the big one. There's some clinical stuff that payers make available. It's useful in its aggregative properties. It's less useful in the sense that it's not as timely or as interesting as the clinical data from providers, from doctors, but still a good perspective. So what do we think about FHIR at Flexpa, or at least what do I think about FHIR? Standards are a battle against entropy. And like the standard itself battles against proprietary formats, and then you have IGs that battle one layer deeper against the entropy inherent to the standard, and then so on and so forth. We continue to try and be more precise, but there's always differences. We love, obviously, FHIR is great for query-based exchange, a big upgrade over HL7 version 2. Instead of the hey, listen, broadcast, it's a you up and they respond. We love the open documentation. HL7 now has open documentation for everything, but historically you paid. In X12, these other standards you pay. So that's not how it's supposed to be. A great community, chat.fhir.com, at Health Dev Hub. There's these great communities, developer communities. And developer communities are actually exceedingly hard to make correctly, having tried and failed at many companies. So that's a powerful thing. That's a really powerful thing. The FHIR tools, there's so many good ones. They continue to expand. And obviously, Health Samurai and AidBox is really, really good. Having connected to almost every FHIR server, props to them. They've only have a sprinkling of the payer market, but I wish they had more because of the superior experience to many. The things we don't like about it are the adoption mirage. The things in the docs don't exist in the wild. That sucks when you want to use nutrition resource and it's not there. And then divergent implementations, the entropy, the consistent entropy. I think scheduling is one that I used to bring up in this sort of presentation of how 3 different EHRs have 3 different scheduling ways to do open scheduling. This really basic concept that we want to get to at a broad national or international level, just dramatically different operations, resources, etc. The one I'm going to talk to about today is implementation divergence of authorization. And you can use this trope. You hear it in almost every technical presentation. If you've heard about X once, or if you heard about 1X, if you've seen 1X, you've seen 1X. It's like, if you've seen one version of HL7 V2, you've seen one version of HL7 V2. It doesn't scale. And that's because of entropy, this idea that standards, even when fairly precise in what you should do, people's own interpretations, their lack of reading, all these different things combined to entropy, to needing to deal with implementation-specific variants. I'm going to reference the material from our CTO, Josh Kelly, one of the smartest Joshes I know, the other being Josh Mandel. So yeah, rock and roll. What's smart on FHIR? It's a really nicely documented spec, but largely speaking, it is OAuth with discoverable configuration. Very cool feature. Predefined scopes that should be used, but aren't necessarily. And then some optional authorization with launch. There's some other stuff, undoubtedly, but those are the big ones. So as we talk about variants, implementation variants, I'm going to use the classic Oscar Gamble quote. They don't think it be like it is, but it do, to sort of talk about auth standards. How they don't think it be like it is when it comes to discoverable configuration. That is, what does the spec say about the way we discover for a FHIR server? The smart on FHIR spec says, in order to get this launch context and authorization information and the scopes that are acceptable, you can use an endpoint to pull this, to do this discovery. And that's the well-known smart config. And it should be available, and it gives you some really beautiful detail about what's going on. On top of that, there's a metadata endpoint for a capability statement, and people overload that with some authorization information. They usually put the authorization URL and the token URL into the metadata endpoint. Both of these should be open to the world to discover. There shouldn't be this off, because you're saying, hey, I'm a server, here's the capabilities, here's how you can go do your stuff. However, and how they think it should be is that you get these beautiful little JSONs that say, here's the types of grants we support. Here are the, here's the URLs that you can go to for authorization and tokens. Here are the scopes we support. If they don't have that, or sometimes, but in addition to that, they also have this capability statement, and then in these extensions, these fairly standard extensions, you get a token URL, an authorized URL, maybe a management URL or revocation URL. So that's kind of nice. It doesn't give you scopes, but it gives you some auth stuff, and in a discoverable, in a way that's not out of band, that's not readable via documentation necessarily. How it actually do? What do we see in the wild? We see that only 43% of servers for these payers that we integrate with support well-known smart config. I don't know if it's like the difficulty of .well-known smart configuration instead of metadata. I sometimes think it's just the URL is tricky for them to think about. But only 43%, and then only 85% support metadata, and even but a smaller percentage of that actually hide metadata behind patient authorization. So you can only figure out the capability statement once you've once you've connected and then start to pull resources, which is just bad design. It's just bad implementation. But it's that entropy. It's entropy. How they think it be like it is, how it should be according. This is from Smart on FHIR. These are the standard scopes. These are the building blocks, the basic building blocks of using FHIR in these FHIR servers. They should probably use them. So what are some of the, what do we see? Do we see these standard scopes? What we see is a scope cloud. If you've seen word clouds, these are scope clouds. And there's just all these variations. And some don't matter that much, like capitalization and I mean, some different variations of patient read. Do you put the asterisk before and after? Those are minor flaws. But when you compound it with no discoverable configuration, it's like sort of like bashing like a monkey against the keyboard to figure out what scopes are actually accepted. Sometimes you can do wildcards, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have random, custom scopes like interop, or what was the other one? FHIR health records, or HDSC interop scope, or whatever this beast is. It's a fully qualified patient read. Anyway, this is just a subset. There's just so much scope. There's scope shit out there. You just have to ask them, and they get it wrong. Anyway. Compounded with that is these scopes are super fundamental to using this API. When I authorize and get the token, I want to look at that token and see the patient that I'm talking about. I don't want to have to just go and blindly guess at a patient ID. I need to know who that patient is. So OpenID, I should get the ID token. FHIR user, I should get a FHIR user attribute within the ID token that says the FHIR resource that pertains to the launch. And offline access. Refresh tokens are really, really valuable. How it actually do, 9% of endpoints have problems with OpenID scope, if they even support that workflow. Some of them accept OpenID and don't give back an ID tokens. FHIR user, 31% of endpoints don't support the FHIR user attribute. And sometimes even if they accept it, they don't actually do it. They don't actually return that attribute. And offline access, 46% of endpoints don't support it. Although some do support refresh tokens, even though they don't accept this scope. So it all compounds to be really, really confusing. The last piece I'll talk about is the places you actually see a patient ID and in the token response is wildly varied. So in the actual endpoint token response, not in the access token or the ID token, there's often a patient field. It's very nice, very standard. We like that one. But sometimes you have to go to that ID token and just sort of search through every attribute, because the FHIR user attribute defined in Smart on FHIR is not typically there, or is not there all the time. So you search through all these different fields, like logical member ID. Then the same thing for the access token. Sometimes they don't return an ID token, and you get back an access token, then have to search through all those fields and say, is this the right one? Last two places, sometimes it's a callback URL param. So just not even in the token response body, it's just have some free text as a param in the URL, and sometimes you just don't get one, and you're supposed to just go search, like just make a extraneous base URL patient call, and they restrict your search to just patient. But some servers barf at that. So you see wild varieties in that entropy. So what the takeaway is that most smart auth implementations are still pretty dumb. They don't understand or implement basic and useful concepts. So when you do it, make sure you do it these smart on FHIR to spec. It makes just everyone's life so much freaking easier. Flexpa exists to eat the pain for our customers of divergent authorization. This is our team. If anyone was like, hell yeah, Brendan, that was awesome, we have open positions, so feel free to apply because we're hiring. So with that, I am complete on my presentation.
Thank you, Brendan. So I hope you've seen comments from Josh. Yes, Josh, maybe you can sound it.
Let's see. Keep in mind that payers have much less consistent support for these APIs because it's not required of them. They don't have to pass test suites like Inferno. Be interesting to hear whether EHR endpoints are more consistent since they are required to comply and do have to pass Inferno. Well, they do have to have these APIs. CMS requires them if they have those certain plan types.
They don't have exactly these, though.
Fair. It's a recommended set of IGs, or yeah, fair. Like, and we can get more prescriptive in their regulation to deal with this. But still, like, you're coming up with things you'd imagine that they just use smart or something. I think the basic parts of like auth are what's so surprising. I get FHIR resource level deviations, but there's some it's just wild how much time we have to spend on auth configurations and guesswork.
Mm-hmm. About the good test suite, I think the key. So let's do test driven smart on FHIR implementations. Yes. So we have Inferno. We even tried to pass. We passed Inferno. So but I still think it's quite. It doesn't test too deep. Yes, I would expect more detailed test suite. So eventually somebody will write it.
Yeah, I think the Karen Alliance is actually collecting feedback to submit to both Inferno and the CMS to like try and progress things here. But it's human nature. No matter how prescriptive you get, there's going to be implementation level deviance because people think in different ways and people read in different ways and people make mistakes in different ways. So that's part of our mission at Flexpa. It's part of I think anyone who deals with integration's mission.
But still think that most of examples you showed that they can be quite easily detected by test suite.
Yeah, these are organizations that don't intend to be following the rules. They might have read the rules, they might have thought about them and decided that they don't need to or they don't choose to. And so Brendan is obviously right that even once you clear away those issues, there are still more. But today we have this low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, more regulation. Let's do it. I'm into it. But yeah, I can also go on about the content and the deviation there, because certainly we see basic resources you would think to be scarcely included for these regulated entities. Some aren't including coverage. Some aren't including explanation of benefit, which is wild because it's like sort of pretty basic to what the regulation says. So people can read.
Maybe you can just start shame board and create a dashboard with all the problems of smart on FHIR implementation and with funny pictures, so the people will recognize.
Yeah, just pin up United and like a funny. Yeah. Well, thanks for letting me. Thank you for letting me speak. It's been interesting to listen to people and to speak.
Thank you, Brendan.